All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Marina Perry Podcast. I'm super thrilled and deeply actually humbled to have the amazing guest that we have on the episode this week. And I say that not only because I think that Yildiz is the embodiment of deep wisdom, earned through education and application of her life, but also because she has been a teacher to me. So this feels very special for me because I have actually been a student and undertaken a certification in Family Constellations facilitation through Yildiz. So to me, she is more than just a regular guest because she's a mentor to me. So enough about me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Yildiz Sethi because she is phenomenal, and just have a listen. And I'm actually going to read it because there's that much that we need to cover. But obviously a family constellations facilitator and trainer. We'll dive into that, so don't worry. She's also an NLP practitioner, a clinical hypnotherapist, years and a master's in counseling. In addition to that, obviously has helped thousands of students, particularly empower themselves into freedom and success. What Yildiz has also done is created her own methodology. So she has a rapid core healing, emotional mind integration, and hypnotherapists. And I'm kind of messing a lot of this up, but it's systemic constellations. And she will tell you what all of that is. But I also want you to know, in addition to all of that, Yildiz has Amazon bestsellers. She has written many books. Stardust and the Spiritual Path and Be Rich and Spiritual are two that Amazon has listed as bestsellers. But she also has another book about her methodologies called Rapid Core Healing. Now, we're going to link to all things Yildiz so you can go to her and learn from her, much as I have. But I want to dive into today. Yildiz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, and before we jumped on, we were talking about what a year 2020 has been, and the change that it's required from us, and I agree with you on that. But one of the things that I also think 2020 has pushed the buttons on, and it's really the foundations of a lot of our conversation today, is our sense of freedom. And so I know that you have, a lot of your life's work has been around helping people access, reclaim, or create freedom and happiness. Can you share with the listeners a little bit about your personal story and maybe why this became your life's work, or how you came to be doing all the things that you do in the world right now? Just a little background.
Whoa, that's a huge question. Okay. Born between cultures in UK, born into a very poor background, born with lots of limitations, seemingly, and realizing as a young kid I didn't want to stay there, Awesome. And so, yes, I became a school teacher, a physics and chemistry teacher, which I did for about 15 years, which I actually loved. I had a very curious mind, but I also always had a mind that was fascinated by spirituality as well. And as I said, born between two cultures, you're automatically looking at what's this about and what's that about. And then I'm married into another one as well, right? And so it's like, yes, I just became fascinated with who we are, why we're here, why we're meant to be here, what's our purpose, and all of that. And then after all of that, 15 years of school teaching, which I actually loved. I loved teaching kids, loved seeing the lights go on, loved seeing them realize they could do stuff. It wasn't so much about the information, it was more about empowering them to know they could learn or they could do whatever they wanted to do. And one week, a long time ago now, 1998, I think it was, I met two Vedic astrologers in 1 week, in one place. And I didn't know what that was at the time, had no idea, but it was enough to blow my mind. And at that time I was all left brain, if you like, physics and chemistry. And Vedic astrology fascinated me so much that I went home with a course. And there started the beginning of my second career, which within a year of that, actually, I left high school teaching to do a full-time study of Vedic astrology because it was so amazing to me that a chart could tell me exactly who I am, my soul journey, my mental interests and challenges and everything. And so I became fascinated. But then after a while, I realized we're all caught up in karmic cycles that go on life after life after life. Sorry, people, if you don't believe in past lives, but this is what the Vedic system taught me. And it's like, well, what can we do to get out of it? Do we have to be stuck with all these limitations? And that's what got me into counseling, hypnotherapy, eventually family constellations, and eventually doing what I'm doing, EMI, emotional mind integration and rapid core healing. Because I really believe, probably a bit like you do, Marina, that we all have 100% 360-degree capacity. And the only person that limits us is us. We don't know it. It's deep down. But if we can free ourselves from those limitations, then, you know, we can each pursue our own purpose. And we've all got a different purpose. I don't believe there is anybody without a purpose. There are many people who haven't yet discovered their purpose. So that's me in a nutshell. So here I am in Australia doing what I'm doing. I hold a private practice here in Brisbane. I've recently opened up a clinic in Brisbane called Recovery from Sexual Abuse as well, because in the Family Constellations process and the EMI process, frequently I've been dealing with sexual abuse recovery. And I realized that, look, you know, following the Me Too movement that became really prominent last year and the year before, I've got something here that actually resolves trauma and resolves being stuck by that for the rest of your life very quickly within 3 sessions, 5 sessions. So now I've opened a clinic here called Recovery from Sexual Abuse as well, and I do training in that as well. So yeah, I'm a very wide spectrum. Yes, unfortunately, it's a lot to talk about. Yeah.
Well, not unfortunately, that's the beauty of it. And there's a part of me as a multifaceted practitioner and trainer too, who over the years has envied people who have had that one thing, you know, that one speciality that they dived into. I think I loved learning from you, because I was like, well, you know, here's someone who's phenomenal and has, you know, essentially the beauty of you is because of that wide arcing, you know, knowledge base. And I can relate to that. And sometimes it does feel like we're all over the place, but really we're just gathering everything we need to bring it into that center point. And it gives us, and I've certainly noticed this with you as a facilitator and a trainer, it gives you greater agility and capacity to facilitate more complex issues, because it isn't black and white. Nothing seems to be super black and white. So I'm glad that you have all those skills, and they excite me immensely. And as someone who grew up with a mother who was very into astrology, I still remember on the bookshelf with the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's for everyone who doesn't know that there was something pre-Google. There was Encyclopedia Britannica. I remember there was the Book of Life, which had all the nudie pictures in it. And there was all these astrology books that my mum had. So just on the Vedic astrology, because lots of people wouldn't know how that differs to traditional astrology. I have delved in as a client into many astrological readings of different types. But the Vedic one is quite unique. So for someone listening who's like, oh, I know my star sign, I sometimes check it out online, I'm a Virgo or I'm a this, and don't really understand the complexity of that it's so much more than your sun sign. If you were just going to particularly answer, I'd love to hear from you, because I've had this conversation many times, the critic who's like, I mean, really, does your birth date really affect your personality? How is that possible? And I've kind of given my answer, but I'd love to hear the basis for you as to why it might pay to reopen your mind to that.
Yes. Look, as a young girl, I was also interested in astrology, but at that time in UK, there was only Western astrology available. And I kind of delved into that a bit, and it didn't speak to me, honestly, because I couldn't believe that everybody born in the month of April, August, whatever, would all have similar traits. You know, it didn't make sense. And when I read my particular possible sign from that system, I just was nothing like they said I was supposed to be. So I kind of gave that up. And then when I discovered Vedic astrology, it spoke very specifically, because there's only we don't in Vedic astrology consider sun signs so much.
No.
Right? Really, hardly at all. It's more the moon sign is important, and the rising sign. The moon sign will show your personality. The sun shines its light on the moon, so you get the soul energy on the moon, and it shows how you think and how you bring your soul energy into the world in a practical way, in your body, in your relationships, in the way you display yourself in the world. So it's very different. And the other thing as well is the Western system uses what is called the tropical moving star system, which is actually out by nearly 24 degrees now. That's almost a whole sign, or 30 degrees is a whole sign. So it's out by nearly 24 degrees. So those of you that are listening, if you think you're a Virgo or a Leo or a, whatever, because that's where your sun is, if you take away 24 degrees from that, you'll probably find you're not, right? Because the Vedic system is actually very much still in line with if a scientist, an astronomer with a whiz-bang, up-to-date telescope looked up in the sky to see the position of Venus or Mars or, any planet, they would see it exactly the same as a Vedic chart does it. And so the Vedic system is absolutely accurate. It's sidereal. It's not depending on moving stars. And so it's accurate. So yes, when I saw mine, my sun moved significantly. I was meant to be, according to the Western system, sun in Leo, but no, take away the 23 degrees, sun goes into Cancer. Very, very different energy. Cancer for me is my 12th house, which is spiritual and psychological. Absolutely perfect for me. Whereas in the Western system, they said, oh, yes, you'll be an actress. You'll be almost dancing on the tables. Well, that's not me at all, right? So it's very different. So yes, I love Vedic astrology. And there are so many different tools to it as well. And I actually no longer do readings, by the way, just to let your people know. And the reason for that is Vedic astrology is fabulous for personal development, self-awareness, understanding your challenges, your weaknesses, let's say, or your gifts, because we've all got gifts, and also telling, helping you understand why you're focusing here right now, right? And then when a new planetary period comes, why the focus changes to something else. And it's all shown in the chart. So yeah, I love Vedic astrology. Very interesting.
Yes. And that kind of starts to segue a little bit into constellations, because it talks about us being in a piece of the whole. But again, just for those listening, when you hear people, and it's very popular now on social platforms to hear, Mercury retrograde. And I think people often talk about it without really knowing what's happening. And as you said, it wasn't until much later in life that I realized the sun sign was just forward-facing personality, almost like the mask. And then there's the pieces and parts of us that interact in life. And that when you look deeper into the chart, you get a much bigger or more whole picture. And so if you've ever kind of blown off astrology, it might be worth reconsidering something like the Vedic astrology.
Absolutely. Can I just add a little bit to that?
Please.
Sun remains in a sign for approximately a month, right? So Sun is in Aries for a month, Sun is in Taurus for a month, so on, all the way around the world, right? However, with the Vedic system, we don't rely so much on the sun. We rely more on the moon, but even more on the rising sign. So at the moment of your birth, the rising sign, Aries, Leo, Taurus, Sag, Capricorn, was on the horizon. That gives you your actual horoscope personality, right? So it's not, so that makes more sense now, doesn't it? Because within one day already, we've got 12 possible rising signs. And within that, we've also got 27 what we call nakshatra signs in the Vedic system. So this shows how, even though you and I might be born on the same day, and I'm sure we're not, but even if we were, you'd be still quite different to me because you're born at a different time at a different place and have a different nakshatra as well, and a different rising sign. So brings it much more into okay, it's more difficult, it's more complex.
Yeah.
But then trying to say we are simple is rubbish, isn't it?
Yes.
You know,
Well, it is a little bit.
I haven't met a simple person yet,
It raises a very valid point, and I think the ways in which we perhaps most cheat ourselves as a society is seeking to overly simplify complexities, and just like it's the quick pill fix. It's like there's a whole dance happening there. And what I was going to say more to when you said, we're born under all these different things, and then we're also uniquely born inside a specific family.
Yes.
And I learned from you the art or the facilitation of family constellations, which, fascinated me the first time I saw a family constellation, much in the way that you said you came to those two Vedic astrologers, just like life-changing. I remember the part of my left side brain that was like science, proof, evidence, science, proof, evidence. It just went when I first saw a constellation and was present to it experientially. And it was perhaps the greatest gateway into what I now hold as truth, to the best of my knowledge now, that everything is energy, and that it isn't just what we see, and it isn't just what we can touch. And that stemmed, this was now going back 10 years ago that I first saw that. And obviously, the training I did with you has deepened my awareness of what that really means. But for all the listeners, I would love to know, what does it mean to be born into a family? And how is that a constellation or a systemic situation? And why is it invaluable for us to look at it? Like, why is this a thing?
Good question. It's such a big question you've asked there. You ask big questions, Marina.
You unpack it wherever you want.
Well, look, from a Vedic perspective, the family you're born into is shown in the chart, right? It'll be shown whether you're close to dad or not close to dad. It'll be shown whether you're close to mom. It'll be shown all the different things from your family in the chart. And we were meant to come into this family. This is the thing that I realize, that even, many people will say, oh my gosh, I'm sure I was not meant to be born to this mother, this father, this family, or this time. But actually, on a soul level, that's exactly what we decide before we come into life. What is our next experience we need to have to grow? And we need to have it to grow to either accept situations or accept ourselves or grow ourselves. So yes, that's the Vedic astrology part. The constellation part, you don't need to do astrology to do constellations, by the way.
Separate.
A lot of people, when I first went from Vedic astrology into constellations, said, oh, they're the same. Well, no, they're not. They're totally different. It just so happens that, yes, I'm a Vedic astrologer, or was, and yes, I'm doing family constellations, which is totally different. We don't do a chart to do a constellation, right? So constellations, look, if we say we're all born into a family system, our Western society, I believe, and this is what Bert Hellinger believed too, who was the founder of Family Constellations, we're born into a family, but we're not just an individual. There's a part of us that's very much part of our tribe, our group, our ancestral line. And particularly in the West, as we're growing up, particularly going through school and education and what have you, and even going into personal development, it's kind of drummed into us. You are solely, you're a soul person. That's all you are. It's up to you to do everything for yourself. You're powerful, you're strong, you can do it. And which is all very well, but actually we also come from our system. And there's a lot of patterns, feelings, behaviors, thoughts, emotions, blocks that we inherit through our system blindly. That's the issue, right? It all comes through blindly. And it's often, with constellation, it's often not until what I call middle years, not when you're 20 often, but when you're a little bit older and you've gone through a couple of breakups and you've gone through a couple of hitting the wall in your work or your business, or you keep getting the same kind of boss, or you keep losing your money, or you notice these patterns coming in. And that's when you start to think, wow, I've done all this work. I've done coaching, I've done NLP, I've done this, I've done that. I'm so powerful, I'm so well educated. What on earth is going on? And then you look at it in the constellation and wow, that issue with your dad is still there. Or you're feeling some tragedy that happened way back that was not acknowledged or not processed. And this is what happens in the constellation, that you can tap into those blind, I call them entanglements, blind spots or blind connections that we carry with us. And they get in the way until we look at them. Now, the good news is we don't have to live with them, right? That's the good news. We can, in a constellation, let whatever needs to be shown, be shown. All we need to do is really acknowledge it, put it in a better order. We call it order in constellation terms, and free ourselves so we can move on, right? That's really the basis of a constellation. And a constellation takes how long? An hour? 20 minutes? An hour? Whatever it takes. Wow, you couldn't go to those places in 20 years of psychotherapy or 20 years of coaching, could you? No way. And you'd be beating yourself up, saying, how stupid am I? How come I keep doing this same thing over to myself over and over again? Yeah, so it's just a way of looking. Now, the good thing I believe about all of this is epigenetics right now is really showing this is not woo.
Yes.
This is true. We really do carry particularly trauma. And by trauma, I mean strong emotional states that were not able to be processed, or shocks, or injustice, or something. We take them through with the umbilical cord as we come into the world, right? We feel the distress of our mother, we feel the distress of our father, and our parents are feeling the distress of their parents, and it all comes through to us. So we can sometimes be born into a lovely family, a beautiful upbringing, and we've always had this anxiety, and it doesn't make any sense, right? And they go to do their CBT or coaching or whatever, and it's still there. Well, often in the constellation, it's unfolded, resolved, and it's gone. Particularly if it's a systemic issue.
Yes. I love so much about what you're saying, because what I have found to be unbelievably powerful about the systemic work in family constellations is that what you're describing there, which is very often, where I find clients too, the pattern's repeating, and they're like, I'm doing all the things, or I can see the pattern clear as day. So it's not that they're at the mercy of it. They see it, and yet they can't change it. And because it's not theirs. That's what I love about the constellation work, is it's literally giving back what's not yours, because carrying it, you can either carry it or not carry it. Did you know what I mean? It's like it's there and you're holding it. So the only thing to do is not hold it. And as soon as you're not holding it, as you described, it's not there. So it's very fast change work. And it's actually quite easy change work for the client, because you're letting the constellation, bring everything back into alignment. And for those listening,
can I just
jump in?
Add a little bit more to that. Giving it back, yes, but also with respect.
Yes.
So that's so important. Throwing it back at your parents, that doesn't work. It's kind of okay connecting with your group in a respectful way and giving it back. Well, those two things together that are key, really, aren't they? Yeah.
I agree. And this is the thing that I love people to know. I wanted to, there's two questions that when you first started talking about or families in general, that I wanted to dive deeper into. But I think what's important to remember with any of these things that are showing up, and you mentioned epigenetics, and I agree with you. I'm so glad the science is catching up. And we see this now where they're saying it's inherited, addictions, incest is shown genetically now. Even victim energy is literally shown to be carried through. And the way I have come to see the constellation work is that everything in the universe is seeking wholeness or completion. And so when there's a wronging or a polarity in one direction or the other, because we love the generations that have been before it as a devotional act of the wholeness of the unit, because as you described, we are part of that whole. we're willing to sacrifice potentially our own freedom to resurrect or bring back the whole, which means we will willingly take the suffering as an act of love. So it's never like done to us.
Unconsciously.
Yeah, unconsciously, 100% unconsciously.
We'd never do this willingly, consciously, would we?
Our soul does it consciously.
Yes,
our mind is like, what the heck is going on? Yes, 100%. And this is why, particularly for those listening who are like, oh, well, this thing that I'm seeing and I know I'm doing, but I can't seem to not do, this could be a great thing to explore, because that's exactly what we're describing. It's an entanglement inside of a family system. And it's an act of love that you're carrying this burden. And with respect, you can give it back to the people who actually are more than happy to reclaim it, because we stand on the shoulders of the generations before us, and they suffered so that we don't need to. But we think that to be in belonging with them, we should suffer too. And it's kind of all adorable, but just a big mess most of the time, isn't it? Until we put it in place.
I know. It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is amazing, Yildiz. Yeah, it is. So something you mentioned, you said, we choose our family. It's a soul contract.
Yes.
And for those listening, because, you know, I consider myself grateful. I definitely can see all the entanglements I've had in my family system. And mostly they stemmed around money and relationships, if I own what's been true for me in that space. Yeah. But a sense of self-worth was always well established, because I came into a very loving family and a strong one. And I work with people who that's not always the case.
It's such a big gift, isn't it? Having that.
It is such a big gift. I'm
the biggest gift.
Lately, I have been, I can't even express the depths of my gratitude for that as my foundational awareness, because
it makes everything possible, right?
Everything
possible. Yeah.
And so though, this is my question. I also know from working with clients that this is not the gift that everyone got.
That's right.
And I know that lots of people, when they look at their family, they feel guilt because they don't love their family. They don't even sometimes like their family, or even can even get to a place of appreciation or respect with their family. So, and
some families are actually abusive, right? Yes. Or manipulative or violent or cruel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when
that is a case. Yeah.
Yes. And so when we potentially, if we were one of those people and we're hearing this soul contract, you know, and that we chose this family, and I understand what you're saying about the growth and the expansion, but I suppose this steps deeper into, and maybe we just sidebar it for a second around fate and destiny, and then equally your ability to change things. What would you say to someone who's sitting there going, I'm in big resistance that I chose this. I didn't choose it. I don't want it. I'm a victim here. And now you're saying that I picked it. Like, there might be some people who are getting really triggered by that statement. So
absolutely.
Yeah. What do you say to that?
Look, you know, if you set that up in a constellation and they are able to see and experience what happened in their system, whereby things went crazy or went off kilter or got warped or whatever, then they're very happy to give it all back to them, aren't they? And take their freedom. So in other words, I would never, on a conversational level, tell a client, look, this is your lot, just accept it, ever. Okay, I must go with them about how hard it's been and how painful and how cruel it's been, but let's just have a look what happened here so that you can give it back, right? That's the kind way, isn't it? Because the problem is, if that person, let's say you've come from a really hard situation and you really can't even look at mom or dad, or even don't want to look because it makes you feel sick. If you've got children, it's very likely they'll look at you the same way. And so it's very important for us. The way of dealing with it is saying, okay, it was your cruelty or your whatever. Let's give it back where it needs to go. And it probably won't rest with mom and dad. It'll probably go back to grandfather, grandmothers or greats or whatever. But at least it's not with you anymore.
Yes.
Right? And now once you've actually done that, it's like, okay, the minimum I can thank my mum and dad for is my life.
Yes.
Just the life force. If that's the minimum you can thank them for, then so be it. That is the first level of acceptance, isn't it? And the first level of freedom too. And, you know, particularly if you've got children yourself, it's like, wow, you know, if I hadn't been born here, my little kiddies wouldn't be here, etc. Right? And so there's a gratitude already building, right? So there are lots of ways of working. I don't normally go into a discussion stroke argument about this. We're just talking about this in theory now.
Yes.
You know, like you, Marina, we just open the process and look at it, right? And you're absolutely right that if you come from a family like that, it's really hard to be able to develop that really full worthiness. You know, if you weren't with a mum or dad who looked at you adoringly, right? Which is amazing for us if it happens. It's the beginning of that wonderful self-worth. Then you will probably often feel that emptiness and be wanting to fill it up with other things, yeah? Alcohol, success, money, whatever. And this is really why, Marina, I came up with EMI, emotional mind integration. I found that when I'd done constellation work with people and we'd uncovered and unraveled a lot, and most of them had amazing transformations. Some people, particularly those who come from really toxic situations, they also transformed.
Yes.
But there was that sense of flatness still there. And this is why I then developed EMI, emotional mind integration, to help them then put together that worthiness deep inside, just within them. So that's why I developed rapid core healing, because now rapid core healing is family constellations doing the systemic stuff, clearing that side of it. And then the EMI to put it together in a really powerful and more fulfilled way.
Yes.
So that even if you came from a family that weren't loving, after they've done EMI, they can love themselves, right? And that's the self-worth, isn't it, that's coming through. So the combination is what I'm really about now.
And this is the thing about the family constellation work, or the energy work, is we just talked about the systemic work rather. We just talked about people who have come from, you know, really heavy situations. Obviously, then hopefully they're listening to this today and going, okay, I don't need to be afraid to look at this. Potentially this could be a massive gateway towards freedom.
Can I say it's not like psychotherapy?
No.
In a constellation and in EMI, you're not opened up and then have to keep coming back week after week after week after week for years. It's one session at a time and it's closed up.
Yes,
okay.
I agree.
Just let people know that, because that's the scary part, I think, for people.
Yes, and I think the weird thing about constellation is actually, particularly when we do a full constellation, the person receiving the healing is actually not active necessarily in it, which is hard to explain until you've seen one. And so we might describe it in a second. But I also did want to say that even for the people who feel like their family is all good, you know, it's all good, there still might be that pattern, and it might be the dependence, as you just said, on alcohol, and they might still love their parents and they might love their mum, but 2 generations up, you know, or a great grandfather might have gone to war, seen people pass in the war, come back feeling guilty or sad about his life and survivor guilt, and taken to the bottle. And just because the people at that time, and what I love about constellations is it speaks to a much bigger part of growth work and healing, which is that which we don't look at or aren't willing to accept or see, ultimately gets disowned or becomes a shame bubble that weighs us down. And so constellations allows us to open our eyes, and it's not making it wrong or right, it's just saying it is. And by saying it is and it was and I see you, we all become free in the system. And then, like as you've just described multiple times, but hopefully it's landing for those listening, it's just done. It's not something you have to practice at or have willpower with. It's like, I don't want to.
No strategies, there's no things to do. Because it's happened at such a deep foundational level, we don't have to practice it. The soul very easily accepts an easier, more loving situation, right? It's not something we have to whack ourselves to do. We do it easily.
Yeah. So long as the system is in support of it, the soul's like, sweet. And And I was going to say that just to maybe explain a constellation, and before we jumped on, I was sharing with you about one that I ran on the weekend for my coaches who are in training. And just to give everyone a bit of a perspective, especially if you're not watching the video on YouTube where you can see Yildiz and I using our hands and things like that. But a constellation, when run in its full capacity, much like Bert Hellinger originally created it, is actually a circle of people, different people coming together. And then someone's constellation, much like stars in the sky, they place people, what we call representatives, inside the circle as the members of their family. Now, then what happens is they kind of step back, and just as if you were watching the night sky shift and unfold, there is an energetic field that's created. And I know for some of you, you're like, this sounds very woo-woo, and quantum physics is woo. So let's just all agree that science backs a lot of this up. And essentially what happens is people who are in a representative role of, say, your grandfather or your sister, or literally will feel things that 5 minutes before were not their emotions, were not their thoughts. And it really, for me, especially when I first represented it, and one of my coaches on the weekend, he was saying, if I hadn't done it myself, I would never believe it. But as soon as you feel and you're present to yourself, you're still there, but you also know that this is very real in your body. It's such a powerful awareness about energy. So
that's right.
Can you talk to us about how you feel all of this is available at all times, even though it's in the past, technically on the timeline? How can we heal it today if it's in the past on the timeline?
Because I guess even though we're here present now, we are actually still connected to other realms and our grandparents, and we still feel and sometimes get visions of things that happened in their lives, and we don't know where they come from. So in a constellation, look, I guess the thing about a constellation, let's say energy is always there.
Yes.
I don't know if everybody believes that, but you should believe that. If ever you walk into a room and there's just been a big fight and nobody's speaking, but you can feel it, can't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? So there's energy everywhere. Constellations are done in the name of love. Mm. So that's the first thing. That, even if it's a one-on-one session or a group, the facilitator is seeking to help their client peel away all the things that are stopping them from the greatness that they could step into, right? So there could be resentment, there could be anger, there could be cut off, there could be hate, there could be sadness, whatever. So that's the first thing. And then when you actually do in a constellation and you're setting an intention, because that's what we do at the beginning of a constellation, isn't it? We say, well, what would you like to work with? This feeling of block, or the situation with my husband, or situation with my daughter, or what, it doesn't, or my boss, or my career, it doesn't matter what it is. So you're setting that up. Then you're giving the ether or the energy permission, aren't you, to work in that capacity. And you do need to have a trained facilitator to do this. You can hold the space. Because there is I guess you can play with energy, but if you're not properly prepared and trained and in the right space yourself, you could invite other energies in. Yes. That's not helpful. So why I said that is this is about working in the energy of love, and for the healing and help of the client and the system.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think, for me, it's interesting that when we start to talk about, downloaded or from, the generations before, things like trauma, or, it could be eating disorders or money, attain money, lose money, attain money, lose money. Yeah. And when you look at the system, it makes perfect sense, because you're essentially staying in rapport and honoring the same suffering contracts. But when people say to me, I don't see how that's real, I'm like, but just so we're clear, you also are very comfortable with the fact that inside of a woman at any one time, something invisible touches something invisible, multiplies 1,000 times with information and energy until it forms a human, which now has some information from mum and some information from dad about eyes and hair. And yet we're not prepared to accept that maybe with that came other information, that's less physical and more energetic, emotional. And the body, we know, stores emotions. So
right. And look, I've come to realize the body or the mind, and I find it really hard to separate the body from the mind these days. The mind's not just here, it's also all over your body. When you do a constellation, you'll know that you get strong feelings in the chest or on the shoulders or in the hands. The mind is incredibly connected to the body. Now, when you look at the personal mind, there's only about 7% which is conscious. The rest is unconscious. Right? And this is just with your personal mind. Then there's another whole level on top of that, which I call the generational mind or the ancestral mind, which is really what we're tapping into in a constellation, isn't it? And, and all we're doing is looking at that with our intention. Yes, that bit about me losing money all the time, or that bit about, I keep choosing the wrong kind of partner or whatever, and so you're only looking at a little slither, but it's enough to allow the constellation to go to the cause of it, help resolve it, and then come away freer.
Yeah.
So it's like it can't hurt you if you've looked at it full in the face in a safe environment and seen it for what it is and left it there, right? It can't hurt you. And if you think about it, okay, the people who are listening to this who are a bit more scientific, and remember, I come from a scientific background.
So do I. Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you explain dreams? What are dreams? We all naturally dream, don't we? And dreams are crazy. They're berserk. But somehow all those symbols and all those things that put together is a sorting out process for us somehow. And people who don't dream go mad, right? There is actually some research that, without sleep, without dreaming, we would not function. So this is another state of almost dreaming, I guess, sorting some tension or pressure or something out in a totally different way.
Yeah. And I noticed even on the weekend and was reminded, much in the same way, there's that wisdom that simply says, the truth will set you free. Yeah. And I know in constellations, as you've trained me, that sometimes it's just speaking what is.
That's right.
With not the story, it's just like, I feel sad. That's or right. I feel anger towards you. And it's not the story, but just in that. And then, the
real bodily felt sensation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're trained to notice if that statement, resolves or expands the field back. And suddenly it might not even be that person, but the people around them in the constellation. It's like everybody. Yeah. And that's how energy is shifting, just because. So it's not like things go in and we move things and fix things. No. Constellation just expresses what is. So Yildiz, let's say to everyone they need to go and experience a family constellation. That's a given, obviously. But with your work now and all the different modalities you have, when we talk about freedom and the ways in which, and you kind of started off and said, we are limiting ourselves. And I think most of the listeners would agree with that. It's like they know they can not just achieve more, which is the very Western way to focus, but feel more,
be more fulfilled.
All the things, more, the more that they're capable of getting to play with in life. What would you say is maybe the top way or the top two ways, or just some ways that you find we get really stuck in limiting our own freedom?
We've kind of talked about them, really. It really all comes down to your sense of worthiness.
Okay, yeah.
Because honestly, if you really don't believe you are worthy, why would you allow yourself to get your goal?
Right.
And so you can work on the goals and the steps and what you need to do as much as you like. And possibly the people who are listening here have already done this. and they still hit the wall, right? And so I guess when you hit those walls, you know, look at them with somebody who can help you look at them.
Yes.
And don't go into long-term 20-year therapies, please. Life is too precious for that. You know, it's we just need to dip in, sort it out, and get on with life, you know?
Yes, I love
because therapy can end up like a lifestyle of its own, which I think is quite a negative.
We can get a bit addicted to the story, can't we? And therefore being right about the story. So what I'm hearing you say there is it's the beliefs that are either blocking or allowing the reality in. And so if somebody is
it's the beliefs and the emotional trauma that's trapped in the body, right? Because you know, Marina, that when people are in a constellation, they feel it bodily, right? So it's not just the belief. And that's why I find it so hard these days to separate the brain and the mind from the body, because it really is all joined up. You know, our brain has got all the neural pathways going to every single cell of our body. So what we're thinking is going to be directed to our body cells, isn't it? It's not so separate anymore. Yeah,
I think people love to debate whether it's thought precedes emotion or emotion precedes thought. And I agree with you. I think that
I think the CBT model way back in the 1960s came up with the idea that the thoughts precede emotion.
Yes.
But present day neuroscience, and particularly the kind of work I'm doing, shows totally the opposite.
Yes.
You can't tell me that a tiny baby that's just been born, who is screaming or cooing, is not feeling emotion. Right? Emotion precedes thought. Definitely.
Well, I agree with you. And I think this is the value of somatic work and the awareness that we are a body. That's what makes us human. And I think so often we try to just go over it almost like it's an inconvenience. Like if I can just figure this out with my mind.
If I can figure it out with my mind, this is what the models say. Figure it out with your mind.
Think your way out.
It will go away. Yes. Well, they can do it with their mind, but all of a sudden they're triggered and it all comes back up again. So then they're getting angry with themselves because they have not been able to control or regulate their emotions. That's a very common saying, isn't it? When in fact, you know, the way I'm working and the way you're working with family constellations, we don't need to regulate. We just resolve them and there's nothing to regulate anymore.
And I don't know if would you agree?
Emotions.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just accept your nicer emotions. You know, it's a better feeling about life or about yourself. Yeah.
And for the people listening then who are like, you know, and I know lots of them who are, you know, trying to figure it out, and literally figure it out is the word, you know, I'm just figuring it out. And you can see that there's even this squint in their eyes and their forehead as they think it through. And, you know, a phrase that I like to say often is the feeling is the healing. Sometimes if we just go to the body, do you agree with this and simply say, what am I feeling? Ask the body.
The body will tell you much more truth than your mind will. Remember what I said about the mind? It's only about 7%, right? So we're using 7% of our human awareness to try and figure it out. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's not a great model, is it? So Yildiz, what do you think then for someone listening, obviously constellations aside and coming to see you to do sessions, but if they're generally looking for more happiness and freedom in life, what would be your top tips? I mean, even if it's off the nothing we've talked about, what would you say?
Those that can, meditation is incredibly helpful.
Yes.
Incredibly helpful. Exercise, incredibly helpful. Just giving yourself that time. And even if you're not used to meditating, getting into a habit of it over even a month, you'll notice you're able to drop into that state much more easily. The other thing you can do to help yourself, I believe, is notice your self-talk. Notice what you say to yourself automatically. When I was a much younger woman and I first came across this and I noticed, wow, I keep telling myself I'm tired, or I keep telling myself, you know, this won't work, and I didn't know I was doing it till I stopped and listened and realized what I was saying to myself, and how damaging that is to me and my body's health and my energy levels. So there are quite a few small things you can do that can really significantly help.
I agree with your suggestions. There's analysis of self-talk, and then obviously hopefully shifting it. Exercise, of course, I'm pro. And
exercise is brilliant, because exercise shifts all those emotions away, right? It really empties out all the emotional channels, which is fantastic.
And I know you love to dance, and one of the things that I like to say to people, because obviously I like pretty much any kind of movement, I'm really grateful that that's perhaps some might see it as an addiction for me, but it really is a daily need to move my body. I feel called to do it. It doesn't have to always look like exercise.
I wouldn't call it an addiction. Our bodies, if the scientists have said now that our bodies were meant to walk approximately 20 Ks a day.
Wow.
Right. So when we were tribes, you know, when we were nomads, it was all about walking, hunting, digging. There was almost nothing sedentary in that, you know. You just lay down when you were tired, really, at the end of the day. So I think it's natural. I think we've
good. Well, that's good.
I think we've gone into an unnatural state now. Where
I agree. My body feels most in dis-ease with all the sitting. And one thing I wanted to touch on around meditation, because I'm glad you have said that, and I say it a lot, but I also very honestly own that for myself, even though I know the benefits of meditation, it has been very challenging for me as this moving person and this overactive mind person, you know, very academically, scientifically raised. It has taken me a long time. And I've said much like you do, just persist with it and be kind with yourself and don't think it's got to look a certain way. But I'm always up to listen to any just your thoughts on that. If someone's like, oh, I hear meditation all the time, but honestly, every time I sit down,
I have a book called Stardust on the Spiritual Path that has a chapter on meditation. And, you know, sitting down with your legs crossed, doing the Om, you know, for an hour or half an hour is not for everybody, right? For some people, it literally is dancing or movement or surfing or listening to music or whatever. I mean, whatever is your thing. I mean, you've discovered, haven't you, that the movement is what your body craves. So do that, you know. Anything, I mean, any one of those is honoring who you are, isn't it? Because you're doing what your own soul is enjoying doing as time for you. So yes, if you can't meditate, perhaps some people, I used to run when I was younger. I used to find that was a meditation in itself. And, you know, dancing definitely is. And there are so many things, aren't there? You know, so many things you can do that are a meditation or even a celebration of being here, isn't it? Really, you know, a celebration of being in your body.
Yes. And so the last question then that I'd like to ask, and unless there's something, actually, let me ask you that first. Is there something we haven't touched on? Because I know you've got so much wisdom to share.
No, not that I can think of offhand, yes.
Okay. Then the question would be this, and this is perhaps, I sometimes feel like it's a mean question, but it's always amazing what comes out, because it's like saying, if Yildiz, if you knew your time was up, or time was up in general, and you had to put a little message in a bottle just from you to the world, or a little sound bite, it's like a sentence, or it's a very condensed thing, but everyone on the planet gets to hear it. What would you be like, okay, and in my life, what I've come to realize is important or true for me, for you, for us, it's all about, or it's just, or what's the message you would love to leave?
It's a difficult question. My first thought was, it's okay to love yourself.
Oh, I love that.
And it's, a lot of people don't think it is okay to love themselves. So it's okay to love yourself. And in loving yourself, you can become the best person you can be. Because if you don't love yourself, it's kind of that meanness or whatever also comes out in your interaction or in your beingness. So you know, it's like if you can love yourself, then you're going to see love in other people. You know, you're going, you know, namaste. Have you heard that saying?
Oh, yes, yes.
May the God in me see the God in you, or the goddess in me see the goddess in you. So it's coming back to that, isn't it? In a way, it's coming back. It all, you know, a lot of people go out and think they've got to conquer the world or save the world or whatever. And yes, I agree. There's a lot we need to do in the world. Absolutely, I agree. But on a personal level, for you and your soul, it's about loving you, having the best experience you can have. And if you're in a good place with that, then you're going to be easy to be around, aren't you? And people will like being with you. And doesn't that make a difference to the world? You know, if everybody did something like this, surely we wouldn't have these problems that we have, you know?
100%. Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's so often, even in the space where people don't think it's a self-love issue, but in the success space or the achievement space, it's always, they often are running the, who am I to be so, you know, great? Or we tend to have this, it's egoic to recognize your magic or to speak about how awesome you are. And it underpins so many things. Sure. And so as we finish off on that, then where do people start with really loving themselves? Is it the self-talk? Is it the...
I think starting with the self-talk would be an easy thing for anybody to do. Finding one thing that you enjoy to do and giving yourself that every day. As long as it's not chocolate or, you know, something damaging to yourself, you know, something that's healthy for yourself, you know, whether it's lying out on the grass, you know, under the moonlight or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, you know, something that you enjoy to do. Yeah. I think start there is a really good place. I've got another book called Be Rich and Spiritual too.
Yes.
Which is also a really easy read. Yes. But it gives people a little map book of things they can do as they go through the book in developing themselves. So that's something that people could look at too.
Because on that and with the book that you're talking about, I think so often people, if we think we're not worthy of love or not worthy in general, which is a big issue, then we don't allow ourselves to have the things.
That's right.
You know, if we can, you know, underpin this awareness of we don't have to earn, you know, to deserve, to then obtain, we just get to have the things, which is a whole lot nicer, isn't it? So
that's
yeah.
Right.
And then ironically,
because a lot of people will say, well, I won't be happy till they're happy, or I won't be happy till I've achieved this, or until I've done this, or it's like, well, you could go your whole life and never actually get to being happy that way. So why not start with being happy?
Yeah.
And then see where that goes. Yeah. See where that goes. Yeah.
Well, I think that sounds like a perfect place to finish up and an epic place for our listeners to start. So Yildiz, thank you so much for sharing like across the board bits and pieces there. But ultimately, as you said, the message really comes down to one, trauma. What I've heard from today that I'd love the listeners to take away is trauma and stuckness can be solved quickly, and that just simply talking about it, constantly being there, isn't the solution. So find ways and means, and obviously Yildiz is a great resource for that can have that happen quickly. I love that, because I think there is a story in our society that, oh, it's hard work to heal. And I think that story gets to go.
It's actually not true.
Yes.
True.
We get to wipe the slate with that one. And then I also love what you're saying, that all of these opportunities, if you will, or coincidences, are a growth choice for your soul. That was a big thing for me that I took away today. And that we're, whilst individual and whilst we can choose to love ourselves first, everyone and everything, we are connected to each other. And the healing in me is the healing in you, is the healing in us. And that wholeness is...
you know, if ever you go to the beach, or if ever you go to a forest, you know, you become aware of the energy around you, don't you? And that we're just very small in the bigness of this. And that's not a negative feeling. That's a growth feeling. It's a lovely, we're part of the planet. We're part of the world, and we're part of the cosmos, you know?
We are. We are indeed. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste to you and all the listeners.
Yeah. Thanks, Yildiz. All right. Big loves. Bye.
Bye-bye.